We have a great panel here. We're going to go for 30 minutes, and this is about blockchain data security, really clearly a very hot topic, particularly when we're talking about personalized health data, especially because people consider that to be probably the most sacrosanct of all data. As my parents say, they will happily give out their credit card numbers to anybody that asks, but when it comes to, what their blood glucose level is, forget it. They will never tell anybody. Don't ask me why. So we have a really distinguished panel here, some great people in general, and also really top-notch experts in this field. So I want to give them just a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, talk about what they do, and talk about their interest in this particular field of blockchain. And then I'll ask a couple of questions to get this started, and I'll turn it over to you.
I'm Marilyn Jackson. I'm the president of UnderGrid Networks, and long-time cybersecurity involvement in terms of DoD networks as well as networks for major enterprises in terms of architecture and security.
Good afternoon. I'm Trey Keifer. I'm with NCC Group. NCC is a cybersecurity services company based out of Manchester, UK. We've got over 1,000 consultants worldwide working specifically with clients to identify emerging technologies, understand the risks with those implementations, and help them try and put in security controls to minimize those risks.
Hey everyone, I'm Rika Sukenik. I see quite a few people that were in here at the Women in Blockchain panel. Welcome. I work for a blockchain startup called Consensys, which operates on the Ethereum ecosystem. Before that, I was working in the blockchain team at Deloitte. I joined Consensys a few months ago. Happy to be here.
Hi, my name is Lena. Kannappan. Many people think I'm a beautiful-looking Russian girl. When they see my name, Lena, they get really disappointed when they get on a conference call or a face-to-face meeting with me. I always start with that joke because my life started in the identity space after 9/11. I worked very hard with the community in fixing the identity issue on the internet. Chaired over 7 committees, went around the globe, and we came up with this protocol called SAML 2.0, and then OAuth 2.0. And I was the only person looking non-American, I should say, looking Asian at the time. When I got on the plane right after 9/11, the officer would always profile me and ask me to stay aside. And I say, I'm getting on the plane to fix this issue. I think that continued. There's a lot of deployments, including cloud computing, SaaS computing, Facebook, social networking. I think with that background, I founded a company. Now we are a major cloud provider helping life sciences companies and healthcare providers move to cloud.
Okay, great. That was a totally lame joke, by the way. Think of some better material, So I want to start off with this question, which, we had a chance to all convene and talk before, and, I think this is kind of the best question to sort of level set this panel, but starting with Marilyn, what do you foresee as the largest risks with blockchain usage in the clinical setting?
I would think that isolation is going to be the biggest risk.
Mm-hmm.
And by that I mean there are so many moving parts to a clinical environment that there's going to have to be a deeper conversation on the interaction of multiple blockchains and how they're going to move information from one setting to another without violations of all of the governance structures that go into operations of a clinical environment. So the interoperability is going to be a huge, I think it has to be a lower level discussion that needs to begin to be had, and a more of a granular approach to how everything is going to work inside of, quote unquote, a blockchain ecosystem in a clinical session.
Great.
So in the clinical setting, I think data integrity and reliability is really paramount. When you're talking about issues around like critical care, the adaptability of data and processes is also incredibly important. So I think there's a challenge for blockchain in maintaining that integrity and reliability of data, but also being able to adapt to a changing environment and changing medical care requirements.
Okay. Rika?
So I'm definitely not a healthcare expert, so if I say anything that seems off, please tell me. I would say that, as Trey mentioned, data integrity is super critical. So the ability for someone to not alter data. So if someone has the ability, to enter or to edit your blood type that's in your medical record, or the allergy medicine that you get, that is something that could end your life. And the ability for hackers to not get into that data. I think that blockchain is not the end-all, be-all. In order to actually have a system that is virtually unhackable, would require a public blockchain, and that's just not something that is possible in the healthcare space, right? So all of the regulation, all of the concerns about patient data, that's all something that is under heavy scrutiny. And so I think that there are a lot of companies out there that are trying to develop a secure blockchain. However, there are additional steps that have to take place before we can say that, yes, blockchain is the end-all, be-all solution.
Lena?
Yeah, I think I acknowledge most of the points made here. The largest risk is the governance, right? The governance of data, and I'm also concerned about a lot of premature networks start to deploy blockchain, where you're supposed to handle thousands of nodes, and if you're starting with a bunch of small set of nodes, you will run into more. You may have to compromise security there. The second thing is, there may be a possibility of single point of failure. If you have a single operator who manages multiple actors in the system, those are the things that we need to come up with the best practices and set of compliance standards and governance standards to manage. So then my second issue I see is the whole notion around interoperability and identity management. Probably I'll talk a bit more in the discussions. We need to start with the proper authentication and identity management foundation layer before even you start really building blockchain applications.
Great. So if we enhance trust and identity layers using blockchain technology, how would those minimize the concerns regarding adoption and implementation of personal data, personal health data, and the sharing of electronic medical records? So if we enhance those layers in blockchain, how does that sort of minimize those concerns, which are pretty ever-present whenever we talk about exchanging health data of any kind to any entity for any reason? Okay.
Well, I think there has to be a different approach. There has to be, I'm going to guess that we're going to have a different multi-security stack for blockchain, because there are going to be numerous touch points within that blockchain ecosystem where security is going to be paramount, whether that identity is single sourced across an entire ecosystem or whether it's single sourced to a particular application. That identity has to be it has to be validated across many different touch points. And so when you're talking about building that blockchain platform, that ecosystem is going to have numerous authentication type of elements that go into not only just the identity, but the transmission of data. It's going to have to go into all of the elements for security across the information. So that conversation has yet to start in terms of what that multi-level security stack may look like, but I think that that is the direction in which we need to take that particular conversation.
Sure. Trey, your thoughts?
So I think when I look at it, from a technology perspective, although blockchain's a fairly new idea, the fundamentals that it relies on, the cryptographic, practices and techniques that are implemented, they've been around for a while. They're fairly well versed. In a lot of instances, they're the most reliable way we have of identifying proof of an individual. So from that perspective, I think blockchain has some real advantages if we can implement that correctly to prove, with as much certainty as we have in mathematics and cryptography currently, that this individual is contributing this data as that person. I think the real key is the implementation. So when we talk about cryptography specifically, there's two aspects to it. There's the mathematical science, and then there's the engineering science between the both. And for NCC, what we're seeing with a lot of our clients is that the algorithms themselves, the math is solid, but the implementation is done by developers writing code, and those developers are human, they make mistakes. So when we talk about identity in the context of blockchain, if it's implemented correctly and those developers don't make mistakes, I think it is extremely reliable and will help blockchain adoption. But that's where we're seeing a majority of the issues, is those implementation problems.
Rika?
Right, and adding on to that, one of the key components of a public blockchain is a consensus algorithm. It is this cryptographic algorithm that ensures the security of data. A lot of companies now in the healthcare space are implementing these private blockchains that take out the premise of a consensus algorithm. There are no miners, and there is still a centralized honeypot of data. So on the identity side, I think that that absolutely that is paramount to blockchain's value add in healthcare. I think that identity solutions are something that is going to be devised in the public blockchain space, and hospitals and providers are going to essentially just API onto these public identity systems. So it's all kind of up in the air now, but the way that the systems are implemented is of utmost importance.
Yeah, I think my comment is also about the implementation and deployment, so that we can talk about getting into action here. I don't know how many of you have seen or read Loss of Identity by Kim Cameron of Microsoft. He talks about minimum disclosure of identity information with other parties. I think in healthcare, this will play really a critical role. Rather than just dealing with de-identified data, anonymous data, you can actually associate a personal identity to that information, but based on the patient's or consumer's control of that information, he can release only specific attributes for a specific purpose. So if we can bring that concept, consider blockchain as an application sitting on top of these current identity management infrastructures, I think that'll be a great way to go. The second point is, when you share the information between blockchain networks or between different parties, if you can also federate that information. When I use the word federate, federation of data, I mean I will only send tokenized information and assertions to the other party. So the other party, the relying party, will consume this information. It knows where this data is coming from. It knows who the identity who is sharing the information from, so that you avoid all the possible hacking in between. I also make sure that integrity and non-repudiation of the data, because you sign, encrypt, and do everything around that assertion. I think that's kind of a topic that I've been talking to some of the Hyperledger guys to see how we can, as a community, bring this to the market sooner. This is nothing new. I mean, we just, we don't have to reinvent. I mean, that's my view. Yeah.
All right. Sir, you want to ask a question?
Yes. My question relates to the difference between blockchain and current security methods you have now. Let's say a bank account, where you enter your bank information or your bank account, and you may want to transfer funds from one account to another or anything like that. That system, from my understanding, is secure. How much more secure is blockchain on top of that? Or let's say the case of Fitbit and information that's gathered about you. Is there a security concern for such information? And how can blockchain enhance that security?
Lena, why don't we start reviewing and we'll work this one?
Yeah. I think I'll just give you one scenario. Have you heard about zero knowledge proof introduced by Zcash? So in that model, you have a verifier and a prover. The verifier make sure that the prover is really the identity, but the prover does not need to show all of the sensitive information. So the verifier will ask a set of questions or actions or tasks that the prover responds to, and based on the responses, he decides who that prover is. I think this sort of identity verification vetting mechanism would really help. That's not the way today you deal with bank accounts. When you open an account, you show your real identity, whether it's a passport or driver's license or whatnot. In the future, as we start to deal with digital IDs and authentications, there will be multiple assurance levels or authentication levels, depending on whether I'm authenticated based on username and password, or a one-time password, or token-based authentication. So you can introduce. So that's a level of security that I see the blockchain can offer in the future than the way how things are done in the banking world.
Today, when you send a payment to someone or you open a bank account, there is an intermediary, the bank, who checks all of your information and verify that it's all accurate. The whole premise of blockchain is to remove all of those intermediaries and develop a self-regulating system. So it is a system that is able to operate without an intermediary that is providing the verification. And so for healthcare, there's all sorts of applications, whether it's adjudicating an insurance claim, or a patient giving access of their data to a provider. But it's important to ask yourself who actually owns and has access to that data. The premise of a blockchain system is to have all of that data kept on a lot of decentralized nodes, and because there are just this sheer quantity of nodes, and you add on a consensus algorithm, that is what adds the security aspect. So it is this consensus algorithm and the self-regulated systems that are the true value adds of blockchain.
So Rika took most of my points, but I'll add on to it. So when we look at it in the context of, how is it more secure than the existing system? Definitely the points, Rika made about removing this kind of isolated, distributed verification system that's only within the bank's networks and we don't get to see, making it more transparent. That's definitely the advantage. As far as, what is going to be more secure, again, it comes down to being a technology guy. All of the technology I've ever looked at in my entire career has always had some issues, right? So blockchain is going to fix a lot of the issues that we've seen before with integrity of data, verification of previous steps in a process amongst many disparate parties. But we're already seeing, and actually NCC has some public research that we've put out there of common vulnerabilities specifically with the Ethereum smart contract platform. And so although it's solved a lot of issues, we're seeing that there are some new issues specific to the implementation of Ethereum smart contracts that are kind of new areas of risk or vulnerability that we haven't seen before. So I guess the simple answer would be, it may be hard to say one is more secure than the other. Blockchain is going to solve a lot of problems, but it's also potentially going to introduce some of its own.
Mm-hmm. Well, if Rika took yours, you certainly took mine. So, and I'm thinking a little bit forward to say that I heard a two-part question, and I think the panel answered it in terms of the identification aspect of it. But we're going to have to do something different with storage, and that storage is going to have to be discontiguous for the most part. And I think that's where blockchain is going to come into play. We're going to have more of a spread spectrum kind of algorithm that's going to say the distributed nodes that Rika spoke about are going to be distributed even further, and there's going to be some kind of key to bring it all back together. So we haven't gotten to that level of quantum storage yet, but we're headed in that direction. And I think that that's where we're really going to see blockchain show up and show out, is when we get to quantum storage.
Great. So I want to throw this question at you all, and then I'll open it back up. Because, as I said at the start of this, and I think all of you understand this, regardless of sort of what your familiarity is with health data, but health data is a big deal. I mean, people are very, very guarded about that data and about how that data is used and what that data is used for, and when that data will be discontinued and how that data will be discarded, and there's a lot of hesitancy, even with the best of intent. So you see somebody walk in and they've got a major addiction issue. You want to use their data to help them. Even with the best of intent, people are still, I don't know about this. So when we introduce a new technology that's like it can collect data from all these different areas, and we can exchange it to a provider, and you get the control over what you're going to be sending, and that data will be far more secure because rather than in a centralized place, right, it's broken up and it's all into many different places. There's still some people that are like, I don't know.
Yeah.
So sometimes the ability of implementing blockchain isn't a technical one, because you all have the technical expertise. Lena, I'm not so sure about, but the rest of you are way there. But it's a cultural issue, right? So how do you think we get over this sort of cultural issue of this ardent, strident protection of healthcare data to make blockchain successful? And I realize that may be an impossible question to answer, but feel free to go ahead.
Well, it's not impossible, but in my world, we call that privacy.
Right.
Right. So, and I had a conversation with my friends, my newfound friends here. We have got to. We can't legislate it.
Right.
We can possibly regulate it, but that in itself is still a major challenge. Again, I think we've got to step back, take a look at privacy from a cultural perspective, and look at how we would apply privacy to that. So does that mean that we take new identity measures, or do we take new security measures? It hasn't really been defined, because we don't have it's not that it's technologically impossible. It becomes more of the governance is where things will have to play. Like the GDPR in Europe says you will do this or you will be fine. We don't have that level of governance here in the United States. So we've got to decide whether or not it's going to be a regulatory approach, which we can legislate, or whether there are some things that we can do from a technology perspective, which we can enforce. So it is a conversation that has to be had by industry. Enforcement kind of leads to other things. Legislation keeps us wide open in terms of the state where we are in our web world, where information is bought and sold daily. So there's no real answer to that.
Okay.
I think that dialogue has to happen.
Right, okay. Trey?
So I think, privacy is obviously a big concern. I think a broader way of looking at it is, what is the adoption of any new technology? And what we commonly see is you've got your early adopters that are not afraid of the risk. So they want to jump on, they want to play with what's new and cool. They want to be the first ones out there to do something. And so we'll probably see very small incremental improvements or adoption of blockchain. I think startups are going to lead a lot of that because they have very minimal risk and huge reward potential. So they're going to be driving a lot of this early adoption, a lot of the innovation and evolution. And then eventually we're going to see a shift where, probably the financial advantage of large corporations or hospitals using blockchain technology to increase their profits or minimize their losses is going to be so advantageous that it's going to outweigh the risks.
Right.
And then you're going to see a huge exponential adoption uptick.
Right, okay. Rika, your thoughts?
I'm going to be honest, I lost track of what the question is. Do you mind repeating it, Jason?
Sure. So, personally identifiable information regarding healthcare is very protected, and it's very guarded by individuals, that they're hesitant to disclose or share that data as eagerly as they would share data about their finances, their social security number, anything about their pet. It's amazing that I can track my dog from anywhere in the U.S., but I can't track my last healthcare visit, which is astonishing. So blockchain offers a way of exchanging data to make it easier, and there's multiple purposes for it, but there's still that sort of barrier of, I don't know if I want to share my data. So how do we get over that in order to, or do we get over it in order to make blockchain more adaptable for everyone?
I think it's a matter of educating people that your data is already being shared today. A lot of people are profiting off of it. Researchers that it's sold to, advertisers. There's a lot of people who are profiting. Everyone is profiting except the owners of data. And so I think the way to incentivize people to use blockchain to share their data is, one, to educate them that with blockchain, you actually now have the opportunity to be compensated to share your data. And the important part is ensuring that a person that has access, the only person who has access to your data is you and only you. And that's going to be a challenge that we are going to have to overcome. But ultimately, as I said earlier, the premise of blockchain is to develop self-regulating systems where all of us are the owners of our information, not doctors, not hospitals, not researchers. It is us. And there's all sorts of incentivization models that startups are developing now to incentivize people to join these blockchain networks.
Yeah, I think I agree. Education is number one, but just what I discussed earlier about the minimum disclosure of data. I think the blockchain offers the concept of self-sovereign identity. I think that's where I will start and will be able to control my information, what I want to release to the other party. The second thing is the digital divide phenomena, which at recent HIMSS I heard there's about 75 to 80% of the hospitals in the U.S. still use fax machines to fax patient information to clinics and hospitals. And since we are directly working with several community hospitals, we see this as a real challenge, especially when the patients from acute care setting, when the patients get discharged to their home care or long-term care. Either they fax the information about the patient to the long-term care facility, or they send the physical documents, hard copies, in the ambulance, which the patient travels to the long-term care. And then I hear about Uber and Lyft offering new transportation services for these home care facilities. That even makes me feel more scared. I think this is where blockchain can completely disrupt, can help to integrate with these existing EMR systems, and then share this information, the minimum disclosure information. I'm not talking about complete patient record or the complete PII information. I think this is something really interesting that I think we can wait for such innovations to happen in this space.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Lena. I was talking to a group of community health providers that worked in northern Arizona, just straddling the Utah border, a very rural part of the country, and they just got rid of their T1 lines in December. Wow. And I'm happy that all of you understand why that was such a problem. T1 was very popular 25 years ago, and they have a critical access hospital of 30 beds, and they've got a community health center where they have major chronic disease, behavioral health, substance abuse issues, and their data exchange and transport mechanisms are not only probably very insecure, but not very efficient. So you're right, that digital divide is definitely something that has to be taken into account. So we're almost at the end of our time. Anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask?
Quick.
Sure. Go ahead.
Ask a question. Trey, you mentioned smart contracts were one of the main points of risk, especially in Ethereum. One question I had was how are companies going to address that risk going forward? Is it going to be some form of security audit or some equivalent that is going to be provided to consumers to let them know that this smart contract or this DApp is secure enough to use? What do you foresee?
Definitely, yes. So in the traditional technology space, we have third-party audits and assessments. And so NCC is actually one of the few companies leading the way for blockchain, in that we've got a dedicated practice that can actually go in if you're developing a blockchain application, or if you're an organization relying on a third-party blockchain application. We have individuals that are specifically trained in cryptography, fundamentals and vulnerabilities that can go in and assess the level of security within that solution. Additionally, I think I mentioned it a little bit before, we're doing a lot of open source research and documentation. So we've released white papers on the Ethereum contract, smart contract vulnerabilities. We want to be, publishing information out there for others to understand, because there's a huge lack of technical expertise in this field. I've been in security, 15 plus years, and there's even individuals in NCC that I'm impressed with, because I've never met skill sets like this before. So it's a very small group of individuals that has that skill now. We want to expand that, and we can't do it just with ourselves. We need to be part of the community. We need to be participating in panels like this, talking to people that are actually writing the code and teaching them, here's what we've seen, here's, in the example of the Ethereum smart contracts, specific code segments that you can look at, see if you have similar constructs in your applications, and see what the vulnerabilities with that were, and kind of help understand it more.
We have time for one last quick question.
Mine's more a comment. And to you, Jason, I think your premise is that there needs to be a changeover from institutional control to patient control of data. And in that changeover, there's the concern of sharing information. Mm-hmm. As it is right now, there are regulations, let's say, regarding medication that people have or should adhere to, but they don't. If there's a need to enforce those rules or those laws, then that might be a way in to get people to comply and then to share. But then more importantly, I remember when Google first came and, people were scared of the information they were collecting. And then I was the same. I got lost in New Jersey, and I'm like, I'm scared of Google. But then I wanted to find my way up, so I just signed on. And after that, it was like, okay, fine. So I think people are going to be put in places where fear or need is going to make them do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do, and relinquish some of that security. And that it's, they probably may not know much about the system and how secure it is. But when your life is at stake, you tend to let all that go just for the benefit of.
Well, I like to challenge your thought and say that that's where innovation comes in. Because you can't overlay the things that we've always done in this new economy. Just say, for instance, there's an emergency, and my data is out there, but it's just data. I could possibly have something that looks like a PII key or something that I attach to that data through some kind of identification or some type of certification, et cetera, that makes it relevant to me. So when you start talking about innovation, that's a chain of thought that most people don't have. Right, so we've got to get to that level of thought, that level of cognition to say, we've got to do something different, right?
In fact, sorry.
One more quick question.
I was just.
I wanted to share this information with you all. I'm a blockchain council certified blockchain developer and team developer. Just wanted to add something about this data security in this conversation because I found it relevant. So there are three phases in this blockchain technology. First came Bitcoin, which actually brought this blockchain technology in. And you can play with that. The Ethereum came up with that kind of feature where you can come up with the right smart contracts and apply your business rules in it. And then the third one is the hyperledger thing where another piece got added, which is membership. The membership has a different level of access. That's where you can control the access, answering all the questions. Every user can have a different kind of level of security. Can be the whole blockchain, or can have access only to the chain code, or access only to some part of the application. So application is added. There is a blockchain, got added with smart contracts, got added with applications and with membership.
Thank you. Well, I know that the panel will stay here because I'm going to make them for at least 5 more minutes for any follow-up questions. But please join me in giving them a hand of applause for time. It's great to meet all of you today and know all of you. So thank you very much, and we'll talk soon, I'm sure.